to the Church of the Holy Spirit in Lake Forest. My name is Patrick Godon, Artistic Director of the International Chamber Artists, and today I'm speaking with Jim Stephenson. Jim is our new Composer-in-Residence. Welcome, Jim. Welcome back.
Thank you, Patrick. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. It's been so long. I've missed you. I'd like to begin today by, on our last session we talked about Jim as a composer and how we met and what it's like to be a composer-in-residence. And today I'd like to talk more about our upcoming concert on November 20th at St. Gregory the Great Church, God willing, and November 21st here at Church of the Holy Spirit in Lake Forest. Now on this performance we'll be featuring the Fauré Piano Quintet, number 1 D minor, Opus 89, and Jim's String Quartet. And I'd just like to hear a little bit more. It's a really interesting story about how this particular piece came to be. Jim, would you like to tell us a little bit about the connections to Sally and your wife Sally and how this came to be?
Sure. So happy that you're going to be doing my string quartet. I can't wait to hear it. And it's sort of a trip back home, if you will, for me to my early roots as a composer, because as we talked about last time we met in our interview, I began composing kind of as a hobby in my mid-20s, and one of the first pieces I wrote was actually the string quartet that you are going to be performing. Not you, there's no piano part,
right.
Sorry, but you're wonderful musicians. And so what happened was I took a bike trip in 1994, and the bike trip was a long one. It went from Oregon all the way to South Carolina, and I wanted to capture that musically, and as I said, I was beginning to compose, so I thought, well, why not write a piece about that bike trip? And so the string quartet, the first movement is actually called Oregon, the middle movement is called Back Roads of Missouri, and the third movement is called Headin' Home, South Carolina. So you can almost imagine this. It looks like it's downhill. That's just the map. Nice. But you can imagine this trip across country. But the behind-the-scenes story, if you will, is that the middle movement, the one about the back roads of Missouri, was actually me writing a love quartet, if you will, to my wife, Sally, because we had just been married, and I wanted to write a piece for her. And you might think of Wagner writing Siegfried Edel for Cosma, and admittedly, I knew of that, and this piece was me sort of attempting to do the same thing. So the titles of the movements were a way for me to hide the fact from Sally, my wife, that the piece was actually about her. I didn't want her coming into the studio where I was working and, string quartet for Sally.
Yeah, right.
I didn't want her to see that. So now what we did was, after the piece was completed, her birthday is November 1st, coming up.
Yes.
And
happy birthday, Sally.
On her 29th birthday, this is 1995. Oops, I just gave away my wife. Sorry. And
we'll cut that out in post. Yeah.
On her 29th birthday, I had set it up for 4 of my friends, my colleagues from the Naples Philharmonic, to sneak into our home at 7:30 in the morning.
Beautiful.
And without waking the dog somehow, which was tricky. And so I left the house open, they snuck in, and we had a house with a loft, so we were upstairs, and down in our living room, all of a sudden this music starts playing, this string quartet that I had written. Now, the funny part of the story is that she woke up, of course, and immediately tried to turn, she wanted to sleep in, right? This is her birthday. And we didn't have any kids at the time, so we had all the right to sleep in. And she's looking for the alarm clock, trying to turn it off, like, where's that music coming from? And then she finally realized it was coming from downstairs, and I'm all, hey, surprise. The other part of the story that I'm almost embarrassed to tell is that she ended up cooking everybody breakfast.
Oh my God.
So, which was great.
That's nice.
So, that's how the piece came to be and has become this string quartet. The other interesting thing about it is that a listener might notice like kind of the progression of a composer throughout the piece as well. Because I was such a young composer trying my hand, all of us are being influenced by other composers when we're just trying to start out. And so the first movement is very you know, traditional in its nature. And the second movement, as I mentioned, is this sort of homage or sounding like Wagner, or it just has that feel.
Yeah.
And then the third movement, you know, I'm heading home to South Carolina in the bike trip, and so I gave myself the task of making sure that they're running 16th notes the entire time. It's this perpetual motion kind of thing, because we wanted to get to the finish line in our bike trip. And you sort of hear the evolution of a composer, because that third movement to me is the most Stephenson sounding of the piece. So I think the piece is interesting on many levels.
That's great. That's great. And yeah, I know I went to your website to listen to it. It's just really colorful, and it's just, to me, you're known for your colorful orchestration and writing, and for whatever the group, and it's just a great representation just right from the beginning. If this is your first piece, that's incredible too. Wow. And I think on that recording on your website, Sally's playing on that. Is that right?
Yeah, you know, you got to put your wife to work all the time. It was in 2002. I made my first composer CD,
Okay.
and so all of my colleagues at that point in the Naples Philharmonic are on that CD, including that Etude Caprice that you ended up recording with John Ye. There's a different version on that CD as well. So,
okay, great.
yeah, it's Sally, thankfully, beautifully being put to work and helping her husband out.
So what is it like to go back and hear a piece that you've written early on in your career?
That's a really interesting question, because there's been an unusual or interesting thing to me happening this year. Is a lot of my early works are getting played. My String Quartet, and a piece I wrote called Colors, and my Sleepy Hollow, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was officially my first composition for orchestra, is actually being played several places tomorrow night on Halloween, or yeah, tomorrow night. It's fun for me to go back and just hear this young, hopeful, inspired composer, you know, just trying things out, just no cares, no worries. I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm just having fun writing music, right?
Yep.
And as everybody knows, the more something becomes your job, you start to think about what others might think of, and you try to write for maybe a different audience than yourself, and so that's been fun to revisit. And I'm actually finding myself trying to recapture some of that youthful spirit now that I'm a little bit older, because I think there's something really special about that, and important, actually, too.
Absolutely. Wow, this is a good lesson for young composers, too. Yeah, have you, what other string music have you written?
Well, I've written a couple other string orchestra pieces.
Okay.
Not recently. Again, these would be younger pieces. I've certainly incorporated strings into a lot of my mixed chamber music, maybe a string quartet plus a couple other instruments, or a violin and cello plus 4 other instruments. And of course, orchestral music always. But it would be interesting for me to write a new string quartet at this point, you know, like 25 years later. So I'm hoping I get that opportunity, because I would treat it differently while trying to capture that youthful vigor. Yeah. I know I would treat it differently, and it'd be an interesting experiment.
That's so cool. That would be something that we would be happy to premiere.
Well, let's get busy.
That's right. Not like there's nothing else to do. Right. Speaking of other things, I know you're doing many different arrangements for the Grand Rapids Symphony of larger works, and for our Christmas program, we're hoping to unveil, premiere some new piano trio arrangements of of one of your pieces. You want to tell us a little bit about the piece?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't think people have heard of it. You know,
it's a very
obscure,
unfamiliar piece called The Nutcracker.
Yeah, Nutcracker
by Tchaikovsky. I think that's how.
Yes, I think Tchaikovsky.
Anyway, again, one of my endeavors years ago was to rescore the entire Nutcracker.
Wow.
For brass quintet, and I was asked to make some of them traditional, some of the movements, some of the segments traditional, so it sounds as much like Tchaikovsky as possible. Yeah. Other movements I was asked to jazz up and kind of do a Duke Ellington thing, you know.
Like that.
And so I have the entire Nutcracker for brass quintet, which is kind of bizarre for me to think about that I even did that. But so hopefully we can do the piano trio version of those arrangements of Tchaikovsky, because I think it would be a really unique and fun sound.
I think people know it, they love it. It's Christmas time, Tchaikovsky, and people need a break. People need hope. People need some glimmer of that this pandemic will end. And I think that the Ellington arrangements would be just like fitting that bill just perfectly. So I look forward to doing some set from the Nutcracker for Christmas.
Absolutely,
So
it'll be
cool.
a lot of fun.
So
Yeah.
cool. So we're looking forward to doing your work, Jim, all year long. And this particular concert here, November 20th, Friday, November 20th at 7:30 p.m. That's at St. Gregory the Great Church in Chicago. And then our performance here is November 21st at also 7:30, and featuring the music of Jim Stephenson, his String Quartet, and Fauré's Piano Quintet, number 1 in D minor. And then our Christmas concerts, which I hope you will also join us for, again, God willing, and we'll hope that the numbers stay low, that you can. Friday, December 18th will be at St. Gregory's, and Saturday, December 19th here at Church of the Holy Spirit, both at 7:30 p.m. And for more information on all of this, check out our website, icamusic.org. Thanks, Jim, for joining us today.
Thank you, Patrick.
Always great to have you.
As always.
Looking forward to the collaboration.
Not as much as I am.
Great.
Thanks.